Okay, my name is Jackie McKinney. I'm from Hartford 2000, and I want to welcome you to our program this evening. Just a couple of housekeeping rules, or they're not even rules, information, how's that? The facilities, ladies' men's rooms straight down the hall on the other side of the stairs. And most of you have a pink piece of paper in your program, and it's our feedback form, and we'd really appreciate it if you could fill it out. It's important to us as we build programs over this year and the upcoming year. So again, welcome to Well-Behaved Women Seldom Make History. And if you can think back of people that you know about, women you know about, you wouldn't know about them. Oh, wow. Music, too. That's great. And this will be a panel discussion on elected public service. The program is sponsored by Hartford Votes Vota, and it's a coalition of 19 nonprofits who are committed to increasing voter participation in the greater Hartford area. Actually, if we could reach further, it would be the state, but we're going to focus on the greater Hartford area. You may notice some of the women listed, we have some of the women listed in the flyers we sent out in advance are not able to attend this evening, but I do think we have a fine panel, and you won't be disappointed. What I'd like to do, though, before we start is take a little time to recognize one of Hartford's first, a trailblazer, as they call, and we'd like to do a proclamation for a woman by the name of, oh, wait a minute, this is the wrong piece of paper. I'm introducing you as getting a proclamation. That's not right. Okay. I don't read well. I'm better off winging it up here. So we'd like to present a proclamation to Ann Usello, Hartford's first woman mayor. Ms. Usello is not able to attend this evening. She's in her 90s and doesn't get out much in the cold weather. Really? However, we would like to have Veronica Airy Wilson, a longtime Hartford City Council member and someone who knows Ann Usello, to read the proclamation.
Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure for me to join you here this evening and to have this honor. I am sad that Ann Usello won't be here this evening to join us for this recognition as the woman who probably served as an example for all of us in politics. It would have really given me great pleasure to be able to recognize her in Women's History Month for all the history that she's brought to Hartford. I did have the distinction of being able to get the city council and the mayor to dedicate the Ann Usello Street after her. So now as you come in east on 84, I'm sure you will see her name in big lights, the Ann Usello Street. So I'm very pleased that she's gotten that recognition, along with the city and the state made an effort that she could see that while she's still alive. And I learned today that she looks much younger than I thought she was. I heard that she's now in her 90s. And what a wonderful legacy she's left us here in Hartford, being the first woman mayor of a capital city, not only for the city, but for the entire country. She was the first mayor. She served on the council with my cousin and the Reverend Colin Bennett. And he always had these great stories that he told about their travels all over, including Jamaica. So as a little girl, don't think I'm 90, but as a little girl growing up, I heard all the stories. And so I feel very fortunate to be able to do this on her behalf this evening. So on behalf of the city of Hartford, I think those of you who have known me over the years, I was like the proclamation guru. There was not a function that I didn't present the proclamation. And so it's been a long time since I've done this. I can't believe I'm up here doing this again. But it does give me great pleasure to be able to do this evening. So on behalf of the city of Hartford and the Honorable Pedro Segura, Mayor, we present this proclamation to Ann, and her first name is actually Antonia Ann Useller. She's the daughter of Italian immigrants, graduated with honors from Weaver High School in 1940 and from St. Joseph College in 1944, and became an executive with G. Fox and Company. And whereas in 1963, she was elected the first of 2 terms on the Hartford City Council and served as chair of both the Finance and Personnel and Health and Welfare Committees. And whereas in 1967, Ann Useller made history by being elected mayor of the city of Hartford, becoming the first female mayor of Hartford, the first female mayor in Connecticut, and the first woman in the country to serve as mayor of a capital city, and the last Republican mayor of Hartford. That's a little sad, isn't it? But there's still hopes, And whereas Ms. Useller was Hartford's mayor for 2 terms, during which she visited riot-torn areas of the city and advocated for more low and moderate income housing in both the city and its suburbs, for more job training opportunities for residents, and for opening construction jobs to unemployed minority residents. Now, therefore, be it resolved that in honor of Women's History Month, Pedro Segura, mayor of the city of Hartford, along with the Court of Common Council and the residents of Hartford, do hereby proclaim March 20th as Ann Useller's Day in the city of Hartford. I'm sure she and her family. Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to a great forum this afternoon. Great topic. I'm excited to hear what each and every one has to say. Have a great afternoon. Thank you.
Okay, let me get back to my paper here. This being Women's Month, this is one program of a series that the library will be presenting to celebrate and recognize Women's Month. There'll be other flyers and brochures out. And if you're a friend on Facebook, it'll be on Facebook. Friend the library. It's a nice Facebook friend. Okay, on to our panel, and what I'd like to do is to introduce Christine Stewart, who's going to be our moderator, and then I'm going to let her introduce the other ladies on the panel. Christine is known as a trailblazer in her new media, Christine Stewart, editor-in-chief of CT News Junkie. She saw the evolution of the internet as an opportunity to deliver news in a new and interesting way. Discarding the stability of a full-time job at a daily newspaper, Christine purchased Connecticut News Junkie in 2006 from its founder and began reporting on state, government, and politics with the backing of a single sponsor. Today, she manages a group of columnists and freelance journalists in addition to reporting and editing. Today, CT News Junkie has more than 2 million readers a year. Christine?
Thank you. Good afternoon. So I am just going to introduce our panel. There's more information and background about each of our panelists in the pamphlet that you have. To my right, we have Senator Beth Bayh of West Hartford. We also have Susan Bisowitz, former Secretary of State, and we have former State Rep Evelyn Mantilla and former City Councilwoman Marilyn Rossetti. And so I'm just going to get this started with a bunch of questions. And if you guys have any questions, begin to write them down or think about them as we go along through the program. And we'll come around towards the end and take your questions also. So I guess it was last week that I was reminded it was Women's History Month, and on Fox News, in promoting Women's History Month, they had some background footage of women's boobs just walking down the street. All they showed was boobs while they were promoting this Women's Day at the state capitol and State History Month. So I just wanted to start, with a question, and I guess it's probably, I'm also interested in this. How does media coverage, reflect women today, and does it reflect how far women have come?
Well, I'll say to you, Christine Stewart, as someone who served at the Capitol as a state representative and as Secretary of the State, I would often go to the press room at the Capitol, which is on, if you've ever been there, it's on the tippity top floor of the Capitol, and basically, without too many exceptions, it's a bunch of white middle-aged men, and Christine, and Sue Hay. Yes. Fortunately, there were two. So I suppose it should be no surprise to us that Fox has yet again got a whole lot wrong. But we need more women journalists covering women in public service.
Yeah, I was so taken aback with that footage. Actually, I have to admit that we just were laughing. We could not believe that there was it wasn't 2 seconds, it was 15 seconds in two different segments of footage as they're talking about Women's History Month and Permanent Commission, of just camera shots here to here. The next day I was at a press conference and the Fox camera came in and I went like this. But what struck me was, when you talk about the media, I saw your article. There was a teeny tiny article in the Current. But if a politician had shown something like that at a public forum, it would have been on every newscast, on the front page of every paper. I was really taken with how the media barely covered that story when it could have been such an opportunity to talk about where we are in 2013. And then I'll say one other thing, which is I have an exercise I do every morning. Women in the room and men in the room, you might want to join me. So I used to love watching Morning Joe, which, if you're into politics, is a political show every morning on MSNBC. And then there were just vapid of women's voices. So every morning on Facebook, they post who their guests are going to be. And on average, it's like 2 out of 15 are women. So every single morning, I friended them on Facebook. Every single morning, I go, 2 out of 15 an average day. And then one time, it's 4 out of 17. This is way better than usual. And I say, you don't read your posts, do you? But this has been going on. This has been going on for a year. And the most women who've ever been on Morning Joe the most was 4, ever.
Okay,
So we
I know
just don't
Mika.
have...
I know Mika. I'm calling her tomorrow.
Right. No, Mika's lovely, but Mika lets Joe go on and on. If you looked at a pie chart of male talk and women talk, it would be like this would be the women and this would be the men talk. And I think that is a real problem. I know it sounds silly to do that every day, but every day I'm amazed. Every day I'm amazed. So I'll stop there. I'm sure my colleagues...
Evelyn, has it changed?
You were obviously in some ways we have made some strides, but the reality is that the objectification of women is still existent in not only our local media, our national media, but also in entertainment. So none of those sectors are yet immune from the continuing, number one, I couldn't agree more with my two colleagues, the lack of representation of women in power in these positions. There ought to have been any number of women within Fox 61 to have caught that before it ever hit the air. Why? Because we pay attention to these things, because we care about ourselves and we care about our daughters, and we really pay attention to how this affects us. But again, the fact that not enough of us are you know, the journalists who are representing and doing great work like you are, for example, there simply aren't the numbers. And we've got to continue to push to increase that.
How do we get there? How do you bring that young woman up, get her engaged in civics, and get her into public office? Marilyn?
Well, you know, as you were talking about this, it reminds me of a story when I first got elected to the city council where everyone was a councilman, and that was the way it was by just history and because everybody was a councilman at one point. And I remember saying early on, I really would like to be called by something else, person, woman, and partly because that's who I identified myself as, but I also thought it was important as we went down. And there was a lot of debate, there was a lot of, you know, how legal was it, how we could do it, and it took a lot longer than I would have liked for it to happen, but we were finally allowed to. And I remember talking to one of my colleagues, a male who will go unnamed, but Veronica probably knows who it is, that, you know, I said to him, do you get mail addressed to Councilman so? Did you ever get mail addressed to Councilwoman so? He said, well, of course I don't. And I said, because I get mail addressed to Councilman so. So I think it goes to that, starting with things like that, making the point that certainly we do the same job, but let's be called out. I mean, I'm always really, you know, make a point that if I chair something, I'm not the chairman. And maybe some people think it's small, but I think it's an important part of recognizing that we're not, you know, men. But so it does remind me of that, trying to. And so since I've left now, women who are elected in the city of Hartford can be a person, a woman, or a man, but they don't just have to be a councilman.
If I could jump in and make a point on that one very quickly right now, it just also happens to be that right now all but one of the council representatives in Hartford happen to be a councilwoman. And that, again, goes back to speaking to the lack of representation. Mm-hmm. The fact that we don't make the effort, or the groups, or the politics, or the parties are not making sufficient effort to make sure that enough of us are elected.
So I have a couple of really specific suggestions on how to get more women involved in participating in elections and running. One thing is, for everybody who is in elected office, I always encourage them to have interns. Young people who are interns at the high school. I always, in my Secretary of the State's office and also as a legislator and on my Senate campaign, had high school students, college students, anybody who wanted to help to show young people that, hey, you can run for office. This is what it's like to be in government. There's all kinds of interesting jobs. You could be a journalist covering the Capitol. You could be in state government doing research. You could be helping at CTN. There are all these roles that you could play. But I always encourage my interns to think about running for office themselves. And then another thing I'm very passionate about is sharing my story and getting other women who have been elected to public office to share their stories, because I think the more women realize, hey, you know, I became a state representative because I got 4 or 5 female friends around my kitchen table and we figured out how to do it. We ran a great campaign and we won, and I've inspired other people who said, hey, if you can do it, I can do that too. And we need to do that as well.
Yeah, I think it's so complicated. I'm married to a high school teacher, and we're fascinated. We watch every year the high school elections of who's elected president of the high school. We live in a very progressive community, but I would bet over the past 10 years, 90% of the student body presidents were men. And then I was on the Board of Ed. I see one of my great mentors is here, Nancy Ryan, who I used to watch her on TV and say, oh, wow, that looks cool. That looks really interesting. And mentors are so important, or people you look to. But when you're on the school board, you go to graduation, and they're graduation speakers. We don't have valedictorians in West Hartford, but they vote on graduation speakers. And I would say in the past 10 years, if you put the 20 together, maybe there were 3 girls who were voted to be speakers. So I always would say to Tracy, like, why don't they make 1 year a man and 1 year a woman? Because these things get entrenched so early. I will say, my daughter didn't tell me, she surprised me, she was a graduation speaker last year, and I was very, very proud of that, because she'd heard me complain year after year. So she decided, for God's sake, this is the best thing I could do, is to actually be the graduation speaker. But those sound like little things, but they're not little things. And I'll close with this. I was lucky enough to be with the Women on the Bus with Ellie Schmiel, who is the head of the feminist majority, and she has been she's been a really great feminist. And I said, Ellie, why aren't more women in office? Because it hasn't gotten much better, by the way, over the past 20 years. It just hasn't. We used to have the most in the legislature in Connecticut. We do not anymore. We're about where we were 10 years ago. And I said, why don't, because she said, women are dumb. I'm going, well, that's not very nice from the feminist. She said, the U.S. senators have a fundraiser every year, and they give all the money to the Girl Scouts. Now, the Girl Scouts are actually great, and I think they're part of the solution. But she said they should be raising money to get more women elected to the Senate. And I will tell you, as an out gay candidate, the Gay and Lesbian Victory Fund, you're gay, we want you elected. It's very clear we want more gays in office, and they're very targeted with their money. That's all it can be used for. It can't be used for friends. It can't be used for people who support gay candidates. We want more gay people in public office because we think it helps move the needle. Very clear. Whereas she said women are just like all over the place. We need a sort of campaign, and we need a focused effort where women from the top to women in the town councils. So I am sort of loosely now working with a great young woman intern who worked on the Obama campaign from Trinity on planning for a women's PAC. Very focused on getting women at the local level elected. And I just picked out a friend from Bloomfield back there. He's going to a town committee meeting, and I said, you got to get elected. So
no, and there's another young lady who's going to get elected in Hartford over there. So
yeah, we need to run, because when we run, we win at the same or better rate as men. We just don't run as much.
And that PAC is a great idea, but let me tell you also, you should Google the Women's Campaign School at Yale. Mm-hmm. And I have been on the board of directors of that. It's fantastic. And people like Diane Farrell, who became the first select woman in Westport, Gail Weinstein, who is the first select woman in Weston, women who've run for president in African countries, women who've run for Congress, city council, have been to this. And I actually feel so strongly about this. I established a scholarship for Connecticut women, and every year in June, they do campaign training, and it's over the course of several days, so you got to camp out for a weekend, but the training is fabulous, and they do everything from writing a campaign plan to how to campaign, to fundraising. They do another set of trainings for campaign managers if you want to be a campaign manager, and we need more women campaign managers as well. And it's fantastic. And ask about the Connecticut Scholarship because it's probably one of the best things that you could go to if you're thinking about running for office or managing a campaign.
And I think if you look in Hartford, and my short time in public office, but huge experience, started from some good, some bad. Started with, grassroots, neighborhood stuff. There's people here who are still, and I like to think as a Hartford resident, still trying in the ways that I do to push the envelope. And no offense to the guys in the room, but, a lot of those meetings are women. A lot of those meetings are led by women, chaired by women, followed up by women, public comment by women. And I think, right there is where you grow an elected official. What is the next step? Clearly, that's what happened to me. Someone of whatever said to me, you should run for public office. I didn't even at the time, no offense, ladies, know the difference between a state senator and a senator. But you know what? Once that was put in my mind, and I was lucky enough to be married to a guy who supported me and family and friends and others around the community, but that we have people right here, people who've been doing it or will do it, and I think it's a great, I don't want to say breeding ground because that sounds inappropriate, but a great catapult for the next step.
It's a farm team. It's the farm team.
Absolutely, right here in the city.
So who was your role model in going into, was there a female role model in going into politics?
Not going into politics, but I think my role model was always, it sounds corny, was my mother, because she was a public school teacher. she was, you know, married to someone much older than her that drove her crazy, but continued to, you know, God bless my dad, he's dead, but continued to, you know, always said to us, you can do whatever you want to do, but I also think led by example. Right now, my mother's 80. She's been a widow for years. She's in another country. You know, she was a widow early, so she went places. Nothing ever stopped her. You know, there weren't any. So I just thought, okay, you know, that's who my, and also, you know what? Be honest to yourself. You know, go forward and don't try to, politics is a tricky game. And you can get lured in pretty easy to, you know, be who you're going to be when you were reading the paper at your kitchen table. So my mother was my role model was my mother.
And Marilyn, you know, it should not be considered corny at all to be able to say that. I would easily say my role model was my own mother as well. And it reminds me that now that I am a mother of 2 daughters, it's upon me to make sure that I provide both of them, with the examples that are going to hopefully lead them into leadership positions at whatever choice they make in life. But as parents, as mothers, we have a huge responsibility and a huge opportunity as well to continue to do that. We all have role models of different types. We may have political role models. Certainly I saw other women in office, Susan, you happen to be one of them, that certainly, you know, inspired in people like myself to finally make the decision, wait a minute, I can do this. And by the way, I'm going to do this. And if I can tell you a very quick story about how I made that decision, I happened to work for the Permanent Commission on the Status for Women for only a few months, a temporary position doing some advocating for women's issues. And there was this one legislator there who offended me so much every time that I spoke to him that by the time the session was done, I walked out of the Capitol and I said to myself, I am going to challenge that man. And I did. He beat me, but eventually was convicted of voter fraud, so I was able to run again. And there I became an elected official. So again, you know, we have role models of all different types, but let's never forget that our daughters are the next line as well.
So I am very proud to say that one of my inspirations and role models for going into public service was Ella Grasso. And I will never forget how I was in college, and I was starting to get a little nervous because I was going into my senior year, and you had to have a topic for a senior essay in order to graduate. And I was studying history and politics, but I didn't have a topic. And one day I was wandering around in the library at Yale, which is the college that I went to, and I saw this book, and it was called The Power Broker, and it was written by Joe Lieberman. And so I pick up this book, and it falls open to a page where there's a photograph of Ella Grasso and John Bailey, who was the state party chair in Connecticut for 3 decades, and they both have these little reading glasses on their forehead, and they are conferring about a bill at the legislature. And I saw that picture in the book, which, by the way, was about John Bailey and the difference that he made in Connecticut politics and in national politics by helping Abe Ribicoff and John F. Kennedy get elected. And I said, aha, that's it. I'm going to write my paper about Ella Grasso. And I spent a year researching her life and meeting some of her relatives in Windsor Locks, talking to people who worked with her at the legislature and in state government. And then when I decided, I got this crazy idea that I would run for Secretary of the State, I made a point of making my announcement for Secretary of the State under her statue at the Capitol, because she was Secretary of the State before she became the first woman governor elected in her own right in the country. And if you've ever, visited the Capitol, ladies, you will notice that there are all these statues of these gentlemen like Governor Winthrop, Jonathan Trumbull. There are all these statues of men. There's only one of a woman, and it's Ella Grasso. And you know what, ladies? There are some open spots. So hopefully in a few years, one of you is going to have a statue there. But we got a lot of work to do.
That's great, Susan. It's interesting to say who your role model is a little bit hard. Mine was probably my father, which sounds unusual, but it's not. I think men are so important in the lives of women and in letting their daughters know that they can do anything. And my mother had a lot of challenges, a lot of mental health challenges. So my father, as we had 7 kids in the family, I would say I was raised by wolves, which we just ran amok. We just did what we wanted when we wanted until the bell rang, and then we came home. And I think it helped me learn to get along with a lot of different kinds of people. But my father was a basketball coach, and long before Title IX, we used to play every sport with him, and he was a tennis coach. And so when I was 6 and I asked for a football helmet for Christmas, my parents didn't say, no, you can't have a football helmet, girls don't play football. There was none of that. If my father was going to cut wood, I went with him. And so it was this world of possibility in our house where you could just do anything, and there was no gender stuff. So imagine me, I'd been playing basketball since I was 3, and Title IX came when I was in middle school. And Title IX really changed things. So this is when I first ran, I thought laws make a huge difference, and it made a huge difference in my life where from a challenging home environment, sports sort of saved my life. I was sort of a nerdy kid, a tomboy, didn't quite fit in, and back then being a tomboy wasn't cool, believe me. Just this thing where my parents said, you can do this, you can do anything, and then to excel in athletics and be able to go play in college. I think Title IX helped me learn about leadership. It helped me learn how to compete. It helped me learn to persist. So I do think that laws make a big difference. And so that's, I think that women as lawmakers are different. I think I know some incredible men lawmakers, and I think we need 50-50. But when we have a press conference about school-based health clinics, it was all women last week. And when we want to pass a bill about public health and public safety, men care about that too, but they're not as focused on that. So I think mothers become sort of warriors. And when we're looking at some of the gun safety measures we're trying to pass now, it's when we have the day to protect gun rights, it's like 95% men. When we have the day for gun safety, it's 90% women. You know, there are different issues and different priorities, and that's why we need a balance. I don't think anyone's sitting up here saying we want 50-50, but I mean, we want more than 50-50. But now it's like 75-25, and we really need that balance. So I guess that would be my role model answer. A man was my role model.
There are 55 in the state legislature, 55 female lawmakers out of 187. So also what I thought was interesting is we do reader surveys for our website, and we cover, basically we cover just politics and public policy, and 60% of our readers are male. So there seems to be, an interest in politics in general coming from more men.
Yes.
But I wanted to ask, was there ever a moment in any of your careers where you're like, if I wasn't a woman, I could have gotten that done, or felt that you were not taken seriously because you were a woman?
I'll say this, that I am always amazed what people will say to you. So one day, here I am, knocking on doors. I'm running, for state representative for the very first time, and House Democrats did a little seminar, and they said, okay, if you want to win, you have to go knock on the doors of every registered voter. So I dutifully took my voter list and I started, knocking on doors saying, hi, I'm Susan, I'm running for a state representative, your vote's very important and I would love to have your support. And so there I am, and one of the first doors that I go to, I get this gentleman who opens the door, he looks at my card, my walk card, where I had a picture of me with my husband and my daughter Ava, who was 5 months old at the time. And this man says, oh, why are you running for state representative? You should be home with that little baby. And I said, sir, she is precisely the reason that I am running for the legislature, because I want to make a difference and make her future better. And that's why you should support me. And I thought, oh my goodness, so here it is. So there are still some people who have those attitudes, but I also think that that people like to vote for competent women candidates. And so, yes, there are some biases, there are some ancient attitudes, medieval attitudes that are still in existence. To wit, your question about the media coverage of Women's Day at the Capitol. But nonetheless, I think it's even more important for more women to get involved.
I'm sure there are plenty of times that really any of us could come up with examples of where we came across those insensitive comments, or the individuals who just don't quite think through what your capabilities may just be and how they themselves could benefit from your capabilities and things like that. Perhaps an example I could offer that I did experience more than once when I served in the legislature. I was there for 10 years as a state representative, and one of the characteristics that I know I've perhaps in a younger age struggled with, but as the years went by, frankly, began to understand better about myself and understand that it's a valid thing to be, and that's that I'm a crier. And I cry when I feel very passionately about something. So guess what? I had a number of opportunities in the legislature to feel very passionately about certain issues, particularly, of course, if they were, very personal to myself or the benefit of my family and things like that. And sure enough, I'm sure I could count a number of times in which I had that condescending tap on the shoulder by another colleague, perhaps, who would, try to counsel me, perhaps when you go up to the, when you're on the floor of the House and you pick up that microphone, you should try to hold the tears back a little bit, because, you're not going to be taken seriously. And it bothered me at the beginning, but by the time I hit those 10 years that I served in the legislature, I knew that, in fact, I was expressing how deeply I felt about the issue, and that I knew that I could move hearts and minds on the particular issue that I happened to be speaking about. And so I became no longer ashamed of it, and, in fact, proud of the passion that I brought to the job.
And I think, it's funny you say that. I remember early on someone saying, oh, I don't know if Marilyn would be right, because, she likes to cry. and I remember someone saying to me, and that's the worst thing they can pick about why you might not want to do it. So I clearly remember having a conversation with some of my male colleagues and saying, if you view this as a sign of weakness, you're very wrong. This is a sign of feeling deeply about something and compassion. Did I work on it maybe harder to not do it as much as I did to try to control it? But I was really clear about letting people know, and in specific instances, there was nothing I can really think of at the time, but I always felt that I had to work harder, be smarter, work longer, be more aggressive, hold myself to a different standard, have that balance of not wanting to pretend to be one of the boys, but not being kept out of that club where the decisions are made. And it's a real balance of not wanting to give too much of yourself, but at the same time being realistic that you also want to be a part of, pushing the agenda forward. So and now even as, I run an organization with, on any given day, 110 homeless men, 34 employees, majority of them men. And I've had people say to me sometimes, you can be a little tough. And I think oftentimes maybe that's because I'm a little short, chubby lady. But also it's like, do I do that to myself because I want to make sure that, again, compassion isn't shown as a sign of weakness. And I think that's a balance that, at least for a woman my age, I continue to grapple with, but I think it's important to talk about.
Yeah, I think that the vast majority of men are incredibly respectful and listen to our points of view. I think that's the general gestalt. I can't come up with an individual story, but there's definitely a culture that I feel left out of. There is this all guys culture that comes in leadership. So in the legislature, all the legislative leaders are white men between the ages of 50 and 60. The odds of that, if it were just chance, are like 1 in 3 times, 1 in 3 times, 1 in 3, just being white men. It's probably 1 in 100,000 if it was just chance. So what happens is, when men are isolated and in leadership, to me it feels like making a deal becomes the most important thing. And the women on the outside saying, but wait, we can't make that deal. Even if it's the only deal you can get, you can't take that deal. But we feel, at least I feel, on the outside of the deal all the time. And it's
to be confident. And it's interesting, the double standard, because if a woman in a leadership role is confident and aggressive and is a strong advocate, then what is she called? If it's a guy, he's a leader, he's a statesman, right? But she's the B word. And so there was actually an article written about me in the New Haven Advocate, and the title was, Susan Weissowitz is not a bitch. That was the title, and some of my friends were driving off the road because they would see these newspapers in the newspaper box, and they're wondering, what the heck is that, the title of the article? But that was what the writer was writing about. Hey, some people might think, hey, Susan is a strong advocate, she's aggressive. If I were a guy, there would never be a newspaper
women are harder on women than the men very often. So
Indeed.
This is,
And that's why I would never, oftentimes, and I don't know, I can only, people say, oh, I'm such a bitch. I never say that about myself, because you know what? I'm not. What I am is someone who wants to speak my mind, and oftentimes if it's someone I know or it's a colleague of mine, I'll pull her aside and I say, think about using that word about yourself, because if you're using it about yourself, you're making it okay for other people to use it about you.
that's a great point.
So how do you balance
making
that? I mean, how do you balance the, being aggressive and being assertive and being called a bitch?
You know what? Clearly, I kept doing what I was doing, because that was a long time ago. But it is frustrating, and I don't want any woman to get put off or say, "Oh, gee, I better be different." And I think what's great is there are lots of women at the Capitol right now. I wish there were more. I wish we sent more women to Congress and to the Senate. I wish we had more women governors since Ella Grasso. Because I think women can be very tough and they can be very compassionate. I think Ella Grasso was an example of someone who was both. She could swear like a truck driver when she got angry, but she also was very effective, and she was known for her compassion, and people would call her Mother Ella, because she had this very matronly, kind of motherly way about her. And in this time where, at the state level, there are so few resources, she was a master at taking care of people, but at the same time being very frugal with state finances. And that's why I think women are great at all levels of government, because they manage households. They know what it's like to take care of a family's needs. They know what it's like to manage a budget.
And I think to that point, and we're encouraging women to do it tonight, and please tell people, but, if someone's going to call you that, a part of that comes with this is you have to grow a thick skin. You know what I mean? You have to be true to yourself, and you know what? Because I remember the first time I was just so heartbroken by, what I saw as kind of a personal affront, and then you have to just remember to kind of, if you're staying true and you're following the, what works for you, you got to grow that thick skin.
And be true to yourself is such a key to that equation, frankly, because, at the same time, women haven't always in history been sort of nurtured to understand that they have a right to take care of themselves first. And so when we face things like that, when we face issues that are so offensive or that hurt our hearts and things of that nature, I think that we all have a right to also retreat, take care of ourselves, be good to ourselves, meditate, exercise, do whatever it is that we have to do, so that we can, in fact, feel the strength within ourselves to be exactly that, be ourselves, whether the B word is being bandied about around us, about us or not. Then we have a much better chance of dealing with those factors and just staying true to ourselves and taking possession of the leadership that we really do bring to the table.
So in order to get elected, though, you need to raise money. Is it more difficult for women to ask somebody for money to support them than men?
Just run a nonprofit and it gets a lot easier.
Right? It's totally true. You just practice. It's just practice.
Yep.
So which one is running for governor and which one is running for Senate of you guys? No?
Not right now.
I
No,
think
not
we'd
right
all
now.
be awesome candidates. Imagine this ticket right here. It'd be amazing.
Absolutely. On the money issue, I think in some ways it's a misnomer to assume that women have a harder time raising money. I am proud to use myself as an example. The first time I decided to run for office, somebody told me you need to make a list, pick up the phone, and start asking people for money. And I thought, you're crazy. There's no way I'm gonna take that sort of the rejection that's gonna come my way, things like that. But sure enough, it took one afternoon of sitting down and calling the first 5 people on my list, who automatically, because they happen to be family or friends, who immediately said, yes, how much does the check need to be for? And that is all it took for me to be able to continue from day to day to be comfortable with asking for money. And I was extremely proud. The first re-election campaign that I ran, I came in as the second highest fundraiser in the House of Representatives. Probably second to Susan Franklin.
Yeah. but I think
it's a strength. It's very important.
It is really important. Fundraising is a way to show that you're a credible candidate. Yep. And if you're a competitive person, it's awesome because you can see other people's reports.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, campaign finance has sort of wrecked this for me. Because I remember when I first ran for the House, I was so angry that William Tong had actually outraised me. So nothing is worse than second.
And
What's
you know
worse
what?
than
You
second?
also, to the point, I remember the first time I was going to run really clearly, just didn't, know much. And I said, I'm going to do this. And then I realized it's going to cost us money. And, my uncle, who's an attorney, said, you know what, I'm going to give you your first amount of money. And they filed the first report. And I had a couple $100, and somebody who was kind of quote unquote my competitor had thousands of dollars. But you know what? Family, friends. I am very competitive. And you know what? You start asking, and every ask gets easier. And I think once people start believing in, because you believe in yourself and you know why you're doing it, it does become easier.
And it's not just asking for money. It's asking for support, asking for help. So, when I ran for state representative, fortunately we have public financing now, and I was very proud to help fight for that and make it happen. But in order to get support, you have to go knock on doors and ask people to support you. And I'll never forget, the first time I went door knocking, my husband went to the campaign manager part of the seminar, and I went to the candidate part. And we knocked on maybe one street, and I said to my husband, oh, honey, can we go home for lunch? And my husband was like, no. Remember, they told you had to do, 100 doors at a time. You've only done one street. There's no way you're going home. So I went back out, and I started to realize the power of personally asking. To go to someone's home, and it's very powerful that you're there. How many times do people have the opportunity to meet their state representative, their state senator, city council person, board of ed, whatever? And after a while, it got to the point where it would be 9 o'clock at night, it would be dark, and my husband would be saying, honey, we haven't eaten for 10 hours, we have to go home. I've created a monster. But that's because I started to see the power of personal connection, and don't be afraid to ask for someone's vote, to write a check, to volunteer on your campaign, because it'll make a huge difference.
I can attest to Senator Bai being competitive because I was at her
I've
wedding.
been door knocking with her. She's awesome.
She was at my wedding. Yeah, we were the first married in
Yes.
Connecticut. Kristen was there.
So was
Even
there...
competitive marrying.
It's that whole sports coach background,
Yes. So before we take questions, I just wanted to ask one more question about a defining moment. Was there a defining moment in your political career path that you had known that,
I think for me, it was right at the beginning, and again, I just served 2 terms in the state council, but when I decided I wanted to run, I went to what was directed to me to go to kind of the political powers in the city of Hartford, and they said, you know, you need to talk to them and then see what happens. So I went and I thought, this is gonna be a breeze. I'll just go and say, I want to run for Hartford City Council. And the guy said to me, we have enough Democrats. Could you go run as an independent and we'll support you? And I remember that day, and my dad was dead at the time, and my mother's my role model, but my father was something to be reckoned with. I remember saying, oh, no, you have picked the wrong, you just said the wrong thing to me. But that was a defining moment for me. I said, no, I'm going to run as a Democrat, and, I'll see you later.
Oh, your story.
I think I already shared one of my defining moments, and that was the walking out of the state of, the Capitol at the end of the session and thinking to myself, someone needs to take on this incumbent, and it's going to be me.
I have to say that I realized that I was addicted when I got to the Capitol, and I worked really hard. I had a primary, and I had knocked on all of these doors, Democratic doors in my district twice, and I beat someone who had been the former mayor of Middletown. And people said, oh, Susan, it's really nice that you want to do this, but there's no way you're going to beat this man who had been a very popular mayor of Middletown. But I door knocked, and he didn't. And so I won the primary. I beat someone who had been a probate judge on the Republican side when I got there, and all that was great. It was fun to win. I'd worked really hard to win, but I realized I was addicted to public service when I was able to pass my first bill because when I got elected, the first call I got, before I got sworn in, a woman said to me, Susan, I was waiting for you to win because my grandson was killed in the parking lot of a daycare center. And I want you to go to Hartford, and I want you to do something about that. So here I am. I have a daughter at home who's, just about a year old, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, what has this woman been through? What can I do? So I said, all right, I hear you. I will work really hard to try to address your issue. I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I'm going to promise you that I will try. So I got to the Capitol. I had an idea after I researched it to make daycare safer, and the idea was like this big. By the time I got it passed, it was maybe about this big. But I still felt like I had made a difference because there I was, 29 years old, a mom. There weren't any other women, young mothers at the Capitol. I felt I made a difference for this family. This grandmother came when Governor Weicker signed the bill into law, and talk about crying moments. She took out of her purse this picture of the grandchild and showed it to the governor as he was signing. And at that moment I said, I love this because I see how my time and talents has made a difference and made things better. And so sadly I've been addicted ever since, but I love it.
It's not unusual that these women before me have talked about challenging people who are in office or challenging people from other parties. So this great Trinity intern found this data that in machine districts, that is, say a district that's just totally Democratic or totally Republican, that men almost always get nominated. Mm-hmm. Women who generally make the jump do it in an unusual way. So challenging a party, challenging a Republican. My first race was against a 26-year incumbent Republican, and I wouldn't have gotten the seat if it was an open seat, I'm quite sure, because there were probably 6 men in town lined up to run if there had been an open seat. But I had to challenge a 26-year incumbent, and the reason I did that, my moment is so clear. Evelyn, you were probably with me. You just didn't know it. You were down on the floor. So I was always in majority culture. I grew up white, upper middle class, Irish Catholic, and went to Catholic school my whole life in Greenwich, Connecticut. Okay, so I didn't experience, and then I went to University of New Hampshire. I did not experience much discrimination in my life. And then in middle age, after a divorce, I fell in love with a woman, and it really changed my life. And I started to understand. I can remember some things I thought, why are they so sensitive? I can remember thinking this before I was in a minority group. And then when I fell in love with a woman and I realized all the rights that I did not have and that my children would not have, and I came to realize how bumbleheaded I'd been for a long time. The House of Representatives, so I started to follow the gay marriage movement. And Evelyn was an incredible leader in that movement, laying the groundwork.
Thank you.
And I remember they were having a debate in the House about civil unions. So I drove to the Capitol with Tracy, and we were up in the hall of the House. And we were watching the debate. We were standing with some friends, and at about, I don't know, it must have been 11 o'clock at night, the person who represented me stood up, the House of Representatives, pointed at the balcony, and he said, "These people won't stop till they have marriage." And I can just remember the feeling of being called out as these people. And I turned to a friend, I think it was Leslie Brett, and I won't say everything I said, "I'm effing running." And so it was very emotional. It was right at the moment. I thought, all that I had learned, and it was totally about feeling discriminated against and saying, I'm not going to take it anymore. And I think women are more emotional that way, and sometimes it gets in our way, but I think most of the time it works for us. And we get it, and we're emotional, and we're passionate, and we go. And so I challenged that person who ended up dropping out and didn't actually run in the race, but that was it's so crystal clear. I can feel myself standing up there right now, and I was lucky enough to be on the Judiciary Committee when we passed marriage out of that committee, and like you said, you felt it immediately, and I felt it immediately that I was able to be there to make that vote, and then to be the first gay couple married in Connecticut. There's something very sweet about that.
I'm proud to have been there at the end.
I was glad you were there. It was quite a day.
So are there any questions?
Yeah, I thought maybe now we can take some questions from the audience. Well, here's how we're going to do it. We have two people. I've forgotten your name. Thank you.
Urania.
Urania will take this side of the room, and I'll take that side of the room, and we'll go back and forth. And we have until about 7:30. Okay.
Go ahead. Okay. Thank you very much for being here this evening, all of you. You spoke about there's no women on Hartford City Council right now, embarrassingly so, and Democrats. These are the Democrats that did this. You also talked about there being no women in the leadership roles. This year, I suggested, or last year when it happened, that when the Democrats elected all men, I suggested, why doesn't somebody ask them to step aside, one of the people to step aside? The woman, I don't know if you know her, Kate Coalition, she lost by 2 votes, I think. So when is it appropriate to go to the men and say, hey, this looks bad that we have women, and you talked about asking. When is it appropriate to say...
I say go to the voters, okay? And I think if you can, fortunately, if you're running for a state representative, you can go get signatures. There are several routes to get on the ballot, and we have significantly opened the primary ballot in Connecticut so that you can go out and get signatures at the local level to run for state office, and go ask the voters. Have that conversation, voter by voter. And I think that you'll have a much different composition.
But this, to clarify, this is endorsements.
Right,
So
there's a
these
process.
are endorsed people. Is it appropriate to say to our endorsers, hey, we need to take one of you aside and we need to put a woman in, or in leadership in the legislature,
absolutely.
we need to take somebody aside. So are we asking, or should we ask, is my question.
Well, I think it's complicated, but I think in a city like Hartford, maybe there's certain districts that you say, look, at least 2 of you have to nominate women, or we're going back, or something. Because the nomination process is so behind closed doors. It is what I talked about. Entrenched districts tend to be by far more men than women. Women tend to be in more borderline seats, where maybe they're more willing to take the risk, or I don't know why. I think you raise a good point. But in legislative leadership, moving up in legislative leadership is so complicated, and it takes years of plotting and planning and fundraising. And very often, the women are very busy running committees and writing bills and you know, tend to be less into it, but to our detriment. So I think we need to be better at that. So.
And I think, though, just to say that, yes, people should stand up and say, the Democratic Party, I'd be embarrassed to be a Democrat in the city of Hartford when more women than men actually show up to vote in this state. That qualified women like Kate Kowalshin, women of color who had served, Arjo Winch, you know, she had served, why wasn't she nominated? You know, the slate of candidates that you present is indicative of and should be representative of the city or the state representative district. And I'll tell you that the same thing happens at the state level, because you will have big city machines where people will be intimidated at a state convention and told not to vote for this candidate or that candidate. I know, I've lived it. And so it's really important that people stand up to the party, even to the extent of, okay, you don't like the candidates that are endorsed, well, support candidates who are going to primary the endorsed candidates.
Question. I'm here and I'm sitting and I'm thinking, it's not only maybe about 2 or 3 years from now, we're looking for another president. And my focus is on Hillary Clinton. Is any of you guys up there willing to go woo for her? All right, okay, that's what I need to know. Thank you.
Good evening. I want to go back to what Marilyn said about how the majority of the women here in Hartford, we're going to stick with Hartford, that run organizations and volunteer are women. They're the ones who start all the things. Why is it then that the majority of us who are voters are also women? Are we our worst enemy? Because if we're the ones who are doing all the voting, then shouldn't we be supporting women?
Absolutely, and I think, you know, as someone who isn't a parent, you know, unfortunately I'm not a parent, but I also saw a lot of women who you know, maybe 20 years ago, who were torn, unfortunately, between being a parent, you know, being home, going to that next meeting. I think the women who do it as parents are even doing over and above the work. So I think oftentimes we're the ones, but we're also torn with the other responsibilities that shouldn't be the way they are. I often thought that I had the opportunity to, because I wasn't drawn by those or torn by those other things. So I think, that, again, not as a parent, but I often thought that was a part of it, that there was this other piece that, you know, in organizing, it's, you know, you're supposed to stay focused on the issue, but I would often say, but, you know, if that mother doesn't, you know, have daycare or ride or diapers, you know, we have to bring that part of the issue in. So I think it's hard for women too, even though we're there.
Well, greetings. I have a question. Oh, like I need it. I have a question, and I'd like you to be very specific about it. The mere fact that you're a woman and you're elected does not ordinarily mean that you are different or that you're challenging. So I'd like to ask each one of you to name specifically, if you had to advocate for an issue for the future, what would you advocate for and why?
Well, for me now, and it's not because was elected or that I'm a woman, because I've spent the last 3 years dealing with the male homeless population in the city of Hartford, and you know what entails with that. That would be what I would better service around addiction, mental health, supportive housing. From that would be what I would focus on.
I think that we have, the one issue that is in my mind, and it has been for many years, and it continues to be regardless, it's a local, national, and international issue that if I had the opportunity to advocate in positions of power, I will continue to do so. And that would be the simple elimination of poverty. I think that, you know, poverty is affecting every one of our families, and poverty is affecting the future of so many children that should be bringing a promise to the world, to our nation, and in very local ways to our own cities. I think that it would be, having the opportunity to continue to advocate on that issue would be fantastic.
Your question is so hard because it's hard to pick just one thing. For my Senate campaign, I actually wrote a 30-page paper where I had all my foreign policy and domestic policy, like, okay, ask me specifics. Please read this. This is what I would like to do.
She's making it hard for you.
But I have to say that there are two things that really bother me about the state of our national government. In 1970, in England, in the United Kingdom, they passed a law for pay equity for women. And there's a great movie, I forget the name of it, but it's about women at the Ford car factory in England who had a small unit. There were just about 30 of them, and they sewed the fabric on the car seats. They decided to go on strike because they realized they were being paid half as much as the men. And they halted the Ford Motor Company in England with, they had more than 50,000 workers at the plant because those 30 women said, we're not doing this anymore. We're going on strike till we get equal pay. And they actually, the leaders of that strike met with the labor secretary, who was a woman at the time, and they got pay equity in England passed into law by the Parliament in 1970. And here we are in 2013, and none of us make on average what men make. And over the course of our lifetime, depending on what you do, that could be $3 million. So if I could wave my magic wand for the United States, I would say women should have pay equity. Yeah, we have Lilly Ledbetter, but don't be fooled into thinking that that's pay equity. It's not.
My one thing takes care of a lot of this. So my one thing's so clear to me, I've spent my career doing this, is we need a comprehensive early childhood policy. We need, for men and women, we need family and medical leave for the first year after you have a baby, for the man or the woman. We need supportive family child care, small women businesses in our communities, family child care. And then we need all 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds in a high-quality early childhood setting with a high-quality facility. We're paying 20% less now than we were for young children. So comprehensive 0 to 5 policy for our children and families.
Good evening. You guys open up a can of worms. There's a lot of issues that you have to work in order to get on top. Power, it doesn't mean anything if you don't work your way up into power. So you can talk all you want about we need to do this, we need to do that, but if you look at South America, if you look in Europe, March 8th, there was all kinds of women marching on the street to protesting being discriminated. Over here, March 8th, I bet you, all the women went to work. Nobody stayed home. Nobody cared. This is where you got to start. You got to organize. That's when the news media will come and see you. When you 200, 300, 400, 2,000, 5,000 on the street protesting the discrimination against you guys, and that's how the media is going to see you. Now, on the Channel 61 or whatever it is, they just walked behind a woman in the city of Hartford because that's all it was, a few women who work in the streets.
We do need to organize, you're right.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're right.
Oh, yeah.
Not me.
Not me.
That's why in England they did what they did for 30 women. They went on strike. Over here, you don't go on strike. You're afraid to go on strike. Even the men are afraid to go on strike because they lose their jobs. Isn't that wonderful? What liberty do you have? Really, what freedom do you have? You have to go to work. You're a slave. That's what you are.
Okay.
Ladies, I've enjoyed your talk tonight. My question is regarding Sheryl Sandberg, the CEO of Facebook. I hadn't really heard about it. I hadn't paid too much attention to her until I think it was the early show. They were talking about the women, and it was a great show. They were talking about her and the controversy about what she's saying about women are too hard on themselves, or they're saying they're not stepping up to the plate. Some of it, I really kind of think she is right about.
Yeah.
What do you ladies, what do you say, think about what she's saying in her book? It's almost as if she's saying, oh, she's letting out a dirty secret, but that's something we ladies have already kind of known. We're harder on ourselves. We don't give ourselves credit for the things that we actually have done and can do. And she's saying that she's CEO of Facebook, and she still feels as if she's not measuring up. What do you ladies feel about it? And have you actually felt that at one point? You have the skills, but you've never felt like you've never measured up.
I think the dialogue's been awesome. I'm so glad she's out there talking about it. You're talking about it. We're all thinking she's pushing us. We need people to push us. It's sort of like, you know, no one wants to talk about it. We need to talk about it. We need to organize. It's a real problem for our culture on many levels, and women need to take a lot of responsibility for it and step up and lean in.
And you know what? And here's the thing that I very strongly believe that women who are in the top levels of government, the more of them there are, the more women CEOs of major corporations that you're going to see. We help each other. Now, sadly, there is a ridiculously small percentage of women who head huge companies. And one of the things that I always look at when I like to invest in companies, in American companies, and I always look at who's on the board of directors, and it's all middle-aged white guys.
Making $25,000 to go to a meeting.
Yeah, and
they got all these gigs.
Yeah, and in state government, right, we have boards and commissions that do not reflect, to your point about, you know, who's at the local level in government in Hartford. Well, when you have 66% plus of the people who are on state boards and commissions who are white guys, you know, this is a big problem. And so that's why, you know, when I was in public office, I was always advocating to have qualified women appointed to state boards and commissions, because they do a lot of work in government. And, you know, I encourage young people, hey, if you want to go work for a corporation, figure out who can be your mentor so that you can, if you aspire to be the CEO, that you can get there. Because there's a formula. Just as, you know, to win a state representative seat, you have to door knock. There's a formula to becoming a CEO. There's a formula to becoming a statewide elected official. And women need to find mentors so they can get there. And all of us can be mentors. All of us can be mentors for younger people. That's how I got to where I am, because I had a lot of really great help along the way. And what I can do is give back to other young women and try to help them.
Susan, I couldn't agree with you more on that specific point. The messages that we give our young women are so incredibly important. Our daughters, the friends of our daughters, the children that are in our schools have to fight against the constant messaging that they receive. That is negative messaging, that to a child who hasn't yet developed the thick skin that perhaps some of us have, it's a very difficult thing to deal with. And I haven't read her book yet. I'll have to make sure that I better understand her message. But I understand the push that someone like her is giving us. And I wanted to use one example of a sort of personal concept that I call the power of shame. And what I'm using the power of shame for sometimes is in reminding myself how there is actually nothing wrong with shaming those who are not doing the right thing into doing the right thing. And a very small example I used about myself was even before I was in public office, I was appointed to when the Latino and Puerto Rican Affairs Commission, which was the first ever in Connecticut, I was appointed to be a commissioner to that commission when it was first formed. And when I attended my first meeting, it turns out I was the only woman out of about 16 members. And somehow I hadn't quite gotten into the wave of public leadership in government, but I understood that there was a big message to be had there. And what did I do when it came time to elect the first chair? I used the power of shame. I stood up in front of the other 15 male members of the committee and said, you only have one woman. The best thing you could possibly do right now is elect her as your chair. And they did. So that is one of the very messages I want to show, that I want to help us, encourage all of us to continue to give to our daughters and the next generations coming up.
And again, conversations like this, it's so, I'm thrilled to see the people that are here and, talking about, I worked 20 plus years at UTC, talk about a male white world. And you know what I will say? And nothing wrong with a white guy. My father was a white guy. But we won't change until we really talk about it. And to be able to talk about it and really, the power is with us. And at times we sometimes goes back almost full circle to the media, try to portray us who we're not. So it's really the power is with us.
We have a question over here.
My question is, what is your position on the wealth gap, especially for a young woman entering into the job market, and how do you propose closing it, especially with African Americans or minorities in general?
I'm going to have to go back to Beth's idea. We are not providing the opportunities that our very, very young children should have to develop their own capabilities and their own belief in themselves, so that when it comes time to build a career, to go to work, to provide for your family, we have a better position to do that from. And so again, the wealth gap that we suffer from in our society is not insurmountable if we believe that we can actually do it. But I'm going to have to go back to the next generations.
But I
How
think,
are we taking care of our
and
children?
I would say also it's organizing. I mean, if you go back to the days of the robber barons, the last time we had this kind of wealth gap, it was people who organized and said, we need help. And sometimes it's transportation. Sometimes it's like, I think one of the biggest issues is we don't have enough jobs in the city. Like, I go visit all these manufacturers who are outside the city. There's a lot of $23 an hour jobs just outside the city. How do we bring those jobs into the city and build housing around those jobs? I really think it starts with high quality jobs, and as Evelyn said, getting people the education they need for all different levels of job. Not everyone's going to be a CEO, but we need a living wage, and we need things that support jobs that pay a living wage.
And I just can't stress enough early childhood education, because one of the reasons that we have this huge gap is we have cities like Hartford and Bridgeport. They are two of the poorest cities per capita in the entire country. Yet we have places like Greenwich and in Fairfield County, where you have some of the wealthiest places in the world, are right here in Connecticut. There's this huge gap. It's because we let half of the young people that start in public high school in Hartford not finish. That's a travesty. So we have young people who are very well trained in all of these suburban school districts who have all kinds of opportunities. And then we have young people in Hartford and Bridgeport that aren't ready to compete. And so we got to start way earlier, because then it's too late. So early childhood education programs are the way to go for everybody.
I think this is going to be our last question, or
Yeah.
time for more than.
Thank you. It's been a very interesting discussion tonight. I have a question about the younger generation. I think we're all kind of preaching to the choir in a way, because we came of age during a time when feminism was a good word and we all were excited about it. And I, over the years, have kind of been discouraged by the backlash I've seen in younger women who think feminism is a bad word and who don't want to be a feminist. And I just, does anyone have any ideas about how to reach the younger generations coming up and get them as excited about feminist ideals as we all are and we were when we were growing up?
I think, I went back to college as an adult in my 30s, into my 40s, but finally finished. And I remember talking to younger women, and maybe it's a terminology, but I think if some people live with some things they've taken for granted, they don't remember how people got there. So it's important to remind young people of that, like women. So, for me, it's the discussion of, not to sound like, oh, this is the way it used to be, like I had to walk a mile in the snow, but the things that weren't accepted. I clearly remember in my lifetime, my aunt owned a restaurant, and I remember my mother saying to me, you can't go sit at the bar. That sticks in my mind to this day, that in my lifetime, a woman couldn't sit at a bar. You had to sit at a table. So I think it's to remind people of the things that weren't and what more could be, because otherwise we forget.
I think we can also add to that by reminding young women about what is now and why there are disparities. So that, again, everything I do seems to go back to my own daughters because this is what I care about so much. But I want to be able to say, look, this child has this opportunity and this child does not. That is wrong. This young woman has this opportunity when this does not have this opportunity, when a very similar young man has much better opportunities for whatever the details may be, and that is wrong. So whether or not she grows up, either one of my daughters grows up to be proudly call themselves a feminist, which they hear me say it, that's for sure. I want to never stop pointing the inequalities that exist. I want to never stop pointing out to them the fact that there is such unfairness in the world.
And I have two daughters as well, and I make a point of telling my daughters and making sure that I reach out to young people and let them know that we cannot take these rights for granted. Right now, we take for granted in Connecticut that women will always have the right to make choices with respect to reproductive health, yet at the legislature every day, there are threats in Connecticut, there are threats at the national level, in the court system, every day to take that away, and we have to be vigilant. And my daughters will laugh because I will tell them, hey, when I was a little kid, I couldn't play Little League. Only boys could do that. You were lucky you got to play on soccer teams, on t-ball teams with boys, or there were girls teams and boys teams. We didn't have that. And we got to make sure that we fight every day to make sure that we still have that, because in public high schools in my town, they'll take away the rights of girls to certain teams unless parents speak up. So part of that is being an example and not being afraid to speak up when you see inequalities.
Yeah, and I'm an early childhood teacher, obviously, so I think some of it starts with social emotional development, that in an early childhood classroom, children learn about equity and helping in community and learn about when things aren't equitable. But I would look specifically to when I think about my daughter's got a conscience about feminism. In our community, one of the most popular classes in high school is human rights, and now we have a global problem-solving class where a whole semester is spent talking about human rights and doing an action project and understanding the Declaration of Human Rights. We are so hyper-focused, and by the way, I will say I think it's because we're so male-dominant in our political structures. We are so hyper-focused on STEM education and STEM. And, solving world peace is a more complicated problem, but we don't hold that in high esteem. So, being married to a social studies teacher and listening to the things that they talk about in her class, equity, and offering classes like human rights versus you got to know all 44 presidents. Like, let's spend our time in social studies and in school teaching kids about the struggles when we last closed some of the wealth gap. Let's help them really understand what basic human rights are in your everyday life, in your family, and in your community. And I think if you raise those issues up, whether it's race or feminism or ageism, they're all the isms, or the hetero-dominant society, you raise those things up in a safe climate in a classroom with a skilled teacher, it really helps expand. So I would say both of my daughters they're both like human rights, they're both like majoring in policy and human rights, and they hated every election. They hated me being in public office. So I always say to parents, like, what they want isn't always what's good for them. I always, you know what, like, I felt like as a mother, I was going to have a life, and they were going to be a part of it, and they were going to be a priority, but I was going to have a life, and they were going to see my life. And sometimes they hated it, but tried to live as a part of a community, which meant sometimes not being home, not all the time, but sometimes. And I look at Carol Mulready out here. I was in a community where there was just a history of so many women who had children who ran. It was sort of totally accepted in our particular community, I think, unlike other places. But school, human rights. Make it a human rights issue, not all feminists or not feminists, but to stand up for everyone, I think, is where.
Okay, we're going to take one more question. If you can keep your answers a little short. And then that'll be it for the evening.
Sorry, you got all these politics.
I know, these are really passion-filled subjects.
Well, what I want to say is not really a question. What I'd like to say is actually more of a comment. And my comment is that I really hope that some of these ladies in this room could help me figure out the best way to start an organization called Girls in Government. Girls in Government would really help young women learn how to advocate for themselves, learn how to advocate for their children and their family to have in the future, and learn the steps and what it takes to be in City Hall, what that government is like, as well as in the state capitol. I really feel
Amen.
Girls in Government is the way to go, ladies.
What a great close.
Okay, thank you. Did you want to wrap up, or?
No, I think that was a great way to end it. That was perfect.
Thank you all very much. And please don't forget to fill out your feedback forms, the pink paper. Thank you.